They said he left town. But 25 years later, someone found his Bible buried inside a tree. In the fall of 1974, Pastor Elijah Brown locked the front doors of Mount Olive Baptist Church and simply disappeared. No note, no goodbye, just silence. For years, people whispered, did he run? Was he taken? Or was something darker hiding beneath the roots of that old town? Now, fast forward to 1999. A logger cutting through the Tennessee woods hit something strange inside a hollow tree. A duffel bag. Inside it, a Bible, Elijah's Bible, still marked with his initials, still open to the last passage he preached before he vanished. This isn't just a story about a missing man. It's about secrets buried deep in what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. You're going to hear everything, the timeline, the clues, the cover-ups, and what that logger really found under that stump. Because it wasn't just a bag. Let's get into it. Elijah Brown wasn't just any preacher. He was the kind of man you'd trust your kids with. The type that could walk into a grocery store and come out having prayed for 3 people. Born and raised in Georgia, he moved to rural Tennessee in the late 60s, bringing with him a voice that could shake rafters and a heart that never turned away the lost. By 1974, he'd built Mount Olive Baptist from a 12-person gathering in a backyard to a congregation of over 300. His sermons weren't sugar-coated. He spoke about sin, justice, and the kind of forgiveness that takes real guts. Some folks loved him for that, others not so much. In early October, Pastor Brown told a church deacon he was feeling watched. He brushed it off as paranoia, but he started locking his office door more, keeping a notebook with him at all times, and shortening his evening walks. Then, on October 13th, he was gone. No car, no suitcase, no signs of struggle. The only thing out of place, his Bible, gone from his desk, and his keyring was missing, the churchmaster key. Police treated it like a voluntary disappearance. He probably skipped town, they said. People burn out. But no one who knew Elijah believed that. He was mid-series on the Book of Acts, planning a revival, and had just ordered new hymnals. None of it made sense. And then things got weirder. You ever notice how silence doesn't stay quiet for long? In a small southern town, a man disappearing isn't just news. It's air. People breathe it in, pass it around, choke on it in barber shops and grocery store lines. And when Elijah Brown vanished, that silence turned into 1,000 different stories overnight. At first, people assumed the best. Maybe he needed a break. Maybe he went on a quiet retreat. He's probably up in the mountains, praying or something, a woman at the post office told a reporter. But as weeks turned into months and his mailbox filled with untouched letters, the town's patience turned to paranoia. Then came the theories. Someone claimed they saw Elijah at a diner 2 towns over, eating a tuna sandwich and reading the paper like nothing happened. Another guy swore he'd seen him fishing on the far end of Avery Lake. Every supposed sighting came with wide eyes and shaking heads, but never once with a photo or a second witness. The most disturbing rumor started with a man named Horace Delaney, a night janitor at City Hall. Horace told his cousin that he once overheard a heated argument between Elijah and 2 men in dark suits after hours. He said Elijah looked afraid. Not angry, afraid. When Horace tried to get a better listen, one of the men noticed him, and the next day he was reassigned to a different floor. Horace stopped talking about it after that. Some say someone told him to, others think he got scared. Either way, the story stayed alive, mostly in whispers and half-empty cups of black coffee. There was also the matter of money. A small but loud group started saying Elijah had run off with church funds. This was never proven, not $1 was missing, but truth in a small town doesn't always need evidence, it just needs repetition. But the one thing people couldn't explain was the land. In the months before his disappearance, Elijah had gotten real interested in county records, specifically around the woods behind the church. He'd mentioned it in passing to a few deacons, something about old deeds not matching up and mysterious buyouts of black-owned properties near the tree line. He wasn't just poking around, he was digging, asking questions about a development project that mysteriously never happened, yet still had construction activity noted in town ledgers. Nobody knew why a preacher would care so much about zoning and land markers, unless, of course, he found something. And that's when people stopped talking, because it stopped being about a preacher who might have run off and started sounding like someone who got too close to something he wasn't supposed to. 3 years passed. The church had moved on, at least on the surface. A new pastor was installed, the choir kept singing, and the parking lot stayed full every Sunday. But Elijah's name was still in the air, like the smell of old pine wood after rain. You couldn't see it, but you knew it was there. Then came the journal. It wasn't supposed to survive. Torn edges, pages stuck together with mildew and smoke. It had clearly been through something. Someone, probably a friend or family member, had tried to destroy it. But by sheer accident, a janitor going through old boxes found it tucked inside the lining of Elijah's worn leather briefcase. Inside were a few barely legible pages, some lines crossed out, some written in a frantic, slanted hand, like he'd written them in a rush, under pressure. But a few sentences stood out, chilling in their clarity. They're watching. Not the local boys, others. Cars I don't recognize. One was parked outside my house for hours. I saw it buried, shiny metal, old, too advanced. Covered fast, a man in a state truck warned me to leave it alone. If I disappear, it's not by choice. Look near the tree that splits at the root. That last sentence changed everything for the few who read it, but instead of being turned over to police, the journal got quietly thrown away. Some say it was fear, others say it was politics. A black man making noise in a southern town in the mid-70s wasn't a story people wanted to chase. But one young man never forgot that journal, 17-year-old Charles Merriweather. He was just a kid when Elijah vanished, but he was there. He'd sat on the front row for Elijah's last sermon, had walked past the man's study every Sunday for a year. That journal, that one sentence, burned itself into his brain like scripture carved in fire. The tree that splits at the root. Charles didn't know what it meant, but he never forgot it. And years later, that line would lead him to something nobody else ever found. By 1999, Charles wasn't a kid anymore. He was 42, built like a man who spent most of his life swinging chainsaws and loading timber. Quiet, reserved, the kind of man you wouldn't notice, unless you needed someone to haul a busted tree off your lawn in 5 minutes flat. He worked for a small logging company that had just secured a contract on a patch of land deep in the Appalachian foothills, land nobody had touched in decades. It was swampy, tangled with brush, and filled with trees thick enough to swallow a man whole. On the second day of the job, Charles came across something that made him stop in his tracks. A tree stump, but not just any stump. This one had a strange shape, wide, hollowed out in the center, with thick roots that looked like they were splitting in opposite directions. Something about it tugged at him. Then he saw it, a canvas strap, barely visible, wedged into the hollow like it had been stuffed there and forgotten. He dropped his chainsaw and yanked it free. It was an old Adidas duffel bag, cracked, faded, smelled like mildew and motor oil, zipper jammed. He had to cut it open with his pocket knife. Inside, a red clergy robe, frayed at the collar, a glasses case, and a Bible. Thick black, leather-bound. Gold letters stamped on the front like fire in the sun. Sali Bible. Inside the cover, 3 neat initials in faded ink. Yeah, Charles sat down on the dirt and just stared at it. 25 years of silence suddenly screaming all at once. Elijah Brown hadn't run. He'd been here, all along. You know what's worse than a cover-up? One you don't even know is happening. 2 weeks after Charles called the sheriff's office, local news started sniffing around. One reporter, Diane Kellum, had been covering the Elijah Brown disappearance since she was an intern in the late 70s. She knew the town, the players, and the old wounds that had never really healed. So she filed a Freedom of Information request, not because she expected anything groundbreaking, but because something about Charles's story didn't sit right with her. What she got wasn't nothing. Inside that manila envelope, among a handful of dusty typed notes and old black and white photos, was a picture no one in town had ever seen. It showed Pastor Elijah, same round glasses, same quiet confidence, standing at the edge of a tree line. That wasn't strange, but what was strange were the two men standing behind him. Dark suits, no smiles, no context. Their faces were redacted. You could tell the photo had been altered, not time-worn, but digitally scrubbed. And attached was a typed memo labeled Federal Observation File, classified Asset EBB. Asset. Elijah wasn't some government informant. He was a preacher. A good man who baptized kids and prayed with dying grandmothers. But there it was, plain as day. Another note in the file referenced a property recovery protocol and a conflict with local civilian influencer. The name wasn't listed, but everyone reading it knew who they meant. Then the last page chilled Diane to the core. It simply said, "Objective neutralize, no press action required," contained narrative. That memo was dated October 14, 1974, the day after Elijah vanished. Now here's where the story breaks wide open, not in a courtroom, not on the news, but in the back room of a pawn shop run by a guy named Willie Tran. Willie had inherited a collection of random antiques from a man named Clyde Richardson, a city contractor who passed away in 2006. Clyde had worked on everything from highway projects to sewer line reroutes, but in his later years he was rumored to be part of a quiet federal job in the 1970s. No one knew what it was. One of the boxes in that collection had old blueprints. At first glance, they looked like maps of underground piping, but one set stood out, labeled in pen, Oak Ridge Overlay, Phase 2 Restricted Sector. Oak Ridge was the region where Charles had found the Bible, and on those blueprints, an X marked TR. Tree root. No legend, no notes, just a red X and a handwritten phrase next to it. Do not dig. Installed May 1972. Installed what? The drawings showed a metal chamber. A cube, buried 9 feet underground, reinforced. It wasn't labeled for utilities or telecom. It didn't belong to any infrastructure anyone recognized. And that's when people started asking, what the hell was buried under Elijah's town? Remember Charles, the logger? He never gave up, even when the sheriff's office brushed him off, even when the bag went missing. He knew what he'd seen. He knew Elijah had left breadcrumbs. He just didn't expect the next one to come from a thrift store radio. 2 years after the discovery, Charles was helping a friend clean out an estate sale near the old rail yard. There, sitting under a pile of dusty vinyl records, was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Heavy, rusted, but intact. When he turned it on, a voice crackled through the static. "This is Pastor Elijah Brown. If you're hearing this, I've probably been taken." Click. More static, then a full sentence. "There's something beneath that land they don't want uncovered. I tried to warn the elders. They said I was seeing things. But it's real, and I think they know I found it." Click. Silence. The voice was grainy but unmistakable. And at the very end of the tape, Elijah says one last thing. "It's not just a secret, it's a test." A year later, a private researcher, funded anonymously, came to town. He said he was documenting Cold War facilities and nuclear storage sites that were never disclosed to the public. He had equipment, ground-penetrating radar, soil scanners, and permission from a now-defunct land trust to explore the Oak Ridge sector. Guess what they found? A distortion 9 feet below the surface, near a large dead oak tree split at the root. They dug, quietly, without fanfare, and they hit metal. Not rusted piping, not sewage tanks. A perfectly square chamber, reinforced with steel that didn't match any commercial alloy from the 1970s. The chamber had no door, no bolts, no handles. Just one thing. On top, etched into the metal like it had been burned there. E.B. Elijah Benjamin Brown. And below that, a single phrase, Human without faith shall forget. No one has opened it. Yeah. So here's what we know. Elijah Brown wasn't just a preacher. He was a man who stumbled into something. Something hidden. Something dangerous. Whether it was military, scientific, or something else entirely, we don't know. But the land he tried to protect, it holds more than roots. And the men in suits, the blurred-out faces, the redacted documents, they all point to the same conclusion. Elijah found something he wasn't supposed to, and they made sure he never told. But he did leave a trail. A Bible, a bag, a map, a tape, a warning, a message in every breadcrumb. The truth will not stay buried. They tried to erase Elijah's story. But 25 years later, a tree split at the root, and the forest gave him back. 6 months after the dig team uncovered the strange chamber, something unexpected happened. A man, in his 70s, neatly dressed military posture, showed up at the logging site. He didn't introduce himself by name, just showed a badge, nodded to the foreman, and asked to be taken to the spot where the metal box was found. The crew assumed he was law enforcement, or federal, but he wasn't on any official list. When he arrived at the site, he stood still for a long time, just staring at the ground, even though the chamber had already been covered back up. Then he said something strange. "We never meant for him to go in. We told him to walk away." One of the workers asked, "You talking about Elijah Brown?" The man didn't answer. He just looked down again and muttered, almost to himself, "Past the threshold. We didn't stop him." Then he walked back to his car and left. No record of him was found. No agency admitted sending him. He vanished just as quickly as Elijah had, leaving behind one more mystery to rot in the soil. Around the same time, Diane Kellum, remember the reporter, got an anonymous envelope on her desk. Inside was a VHS tape. No return address. She dusted off an old player and popped it in. It was grainy footage shot in what looked like a motel room. Sitting in a chair, lit by a single bulb, was an elderly black woman, frail but sharp-eyed. Her name was never stated, but it was clear from what she said that she knew Elijah. Closely. Maybe too closely. "Out something," she said softly. "Out there, past the old hunting trail. It wasn't just metal or wires. It was a kind of knowledge." She paused, looked straight at the camera. Eat said it spoke to him, that it showed him things, not in words, but in thoughts. Diane watched, frozen. Wanted to use it to heal, to help people, but they said no, said it wasn't for us, said it was dangerous. And told me he'd made up his mind. That night he disappeared. He wasn't taken. He went back. On purpose. And then, the woman said the last line before the tape cut to static. And if he's still there, he's not the same. Diane never aired the tape. She showed it to a network producer in Atlanta, but the footage disappeared 2 days later. No trace, not even a record she submitted it, but she kept the transcript. And that's what was leaked 10 years later. When you step back and put the pieces together, it stops sounding like a mystery and starts feeling like a warning. Elijah Brown wasn't the kind of man to chase conspiracies. He didn't seek fame, didn't crave power. He preached, he listened. He tried to do right by his people. So whatever he found in those woods, he believed it could help. Maybe it was ancient. Maybe it was man-made. Maybe it was something else entirely. But he left clues for a reason. He left breadcrumbs because he believed someone would eventually come looking. Not the feds, not the developers, someone who cared. He gave us everything we needed and dared us to follow. A tree that splits at the root. A map, a message, a chamber. And a verse from Luke that keeps echoing long after the tape clicks off. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor anything secret that will not be known and come to light. You might think this story ends there. A ghost preacher, a sealed box in the woods, a mystery locked under Tennessee soil. But here's what no one expected. In 2023, a new development plan was filed with the county, quietly, low-key, no press coverage. It was labeled Environmental Reclamation Project, Ridge Sector 4. Guess where Sector 4 is? Right on top of the old tree line. The same woods where Charles found that bag. The same woods where the chamber sits, buried and sealed. And the permit wasn't filed by a company. It was filed by an unnamed foundation. The only listed contact, W. Tran, the same last name as the pawnshop owner who inherited the blueprints. Is it a coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Elijah's message is finally getting through, piece by piece, quietly, under the radar. Not in fire, not in thunder, but like a whisper carried through the roots of the forest, waiting to be heard. So what happened to Elijah Brown? Did he find something buried beneath the soil? Something hidden, forbidden, maybe even sacred? Was he silenced, or did he choose to disappear? Here's the truth. We may never know exactly what he saw, but the evidence is there if you're willing to dig for it. His Bible, his voice, his trail. Horist kept it all safe. Until now. Watch the next video before it disappears too.